Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens with your hosts, Jake and Scott. In this week's episode, we are focusing on all the whiskey that has been released over the last, we'll call it 45 days for Bourbon Heritage Month, and the biggest selling season in all of whiskey, September, October, November, December, better known as SOND. So sit back and buckle into the latest episode of the Bourbon Lens. Scott, there's a whole hell of a lot of whiskey that has been released in the last 45 days, and I'm sure there's more on the horizon. Are you overwhelmed yet?
I've been overwhelmed, yes. Yeah, it's an exciting time for whiskey.
Yes, it is an exciting time for whiskey. Speaking of whiskey, as we record this, the UPS truck shows up at my house. So there may be a natural pause in here for me to go sign a package away. And we'll talk about live what showed up at the door. But until then, there has been a variety of things that have continued to hit the market. But the most important thing is heritage brands are continuing to do what heritage brands do and drop banger after banger. First, I want to talk about Jim Beam. One, because it provided probably one of my favorite pours that we had at Kentucky Bourbon Festival, Booker's The Reserve, but they've also launched other things. You got to go to the Supper Club where they featured Baker's 13. You've been a bourbon fan and consumer longer than I have. What's it mean to you to see heritage brands continue to really launch amazing whiskeys with age-stated, depth and complexity to them?
Yeah, I think a couple years ago, I had always mentioned, why are the age statements disappearing? What's the deal? Why are we taking these away? But, it makes sense, right? They were just trying to put out consistently good whiskey. They probably were running low on some stocks or just putting it in the bag for later, which is probably the case for some of the larger guys, especially now that they're putting out 13, 15, 18, 20-year-old whiskey.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see the age statements come back, especially because a lot of the smaller guys are starting to put age statements on their whiskeys because they're hitting milestones as well. So it's kind of, it's not like an arms race, because we know really a 4, 5, 6, 8, 10-year whiskey, yes, they're going to be good, but you're not really comparing those to a 15, 18, 20-year. It's kind of cool to see those numbers on the label again.
Yeah, and I also think it does create a debate amongst the whiskey community on where is the too much age, conversation. I think both of us would agree maybe our top whiskey we've had this year, bourbon we've had this year, is by far probably Jim Beam 20-year from Bardstown Collection. It's going to be really hard to beat that. But that one wasn't over oaky. Did it have oak complexity? Sure. But, it's amazing what the age statement and too much oak can do to the community overall as these older age statements come out.
Yeah, and as palates have changed too. I think people are probably a little bit more sensitive to overwhelming oak.
Yeah.
People are looking for, sweeter finishes have gotten big.
Yeah.
Palates are probably changing just a little bit, what people think. A lot of people haven't really experienced extra aged whiskey. So
True.
They're trying to introduce an extra aged whiskey that doesn't necessarily taste like it's spent 20 years sitting on the wood.
That's true. And I think we're in the next golden era of bourbon and whiskey, right? All of this production has allowed people to age stock back and drive forth, a lot of new flavors, a lot of new concepts, new barrel production. All these things allow for different whiskey, as you mentioned, than we had prior to that. But speaking around Bardstown and Frankfurt area and Lawrenceburg, what are some of your other favorite heritage brands releases that have come to mind? Off the top of my head, just one is a podcast we just did, Four Roses Small Batch Limited Edition with Brent. It's a great discussion. If you didn't listen to that episode, I'd highly encourage you to do that. One, because it's our podcast, but two, because Brent gets really nerdy and explains how the sauce is made. And I think it's something that if you're a bourbon lover, you'd really appreciate.
I think this one's might be a sleeper, and I'm not sure how the market will react whenever it starts landing on shelves, but the Wild Turkey Jimmy Russell's 70th release. I mean, it seems like it's priced at the right point to be pretty popular, but it's not quite seemingly like the $250 like Russell's Reserve limited releases. So I'm hoping to be able to see some of those end up on shelves. 8-year, 101 proof wild turkey, classic wild turkey, what some people would say.
Yeah.
And I think it's like $60.
Yeah, and if you go back to what Bruce said when we talked to him last, as he says, that's what Mimi drinks. Mimi drinks 8 to 10-year-old 101 wild turkey. And he wanted that in a bottle for people to enjoy. So what a great way to celebrate than getting Mimi's whiskey. And I feel like we've been around Bruce enough that we can, instead of calling him Jimmy, I feel like we call him Mimi now. Yeah. But if I saw him in person, it would be Mr. Russell, probably.
Sir.
Sir, thank you, sir, for sharing your whiskey with us. One of the most interesting releases, I think, for this month, you think Heaven Hill, traditionally bourbon, they went with a straight malt whiskey finished and reconstructed heavy toast cognac barrels for their 18th edition of Parker's Heritage. Did that kind of throw you off for a little bit? Because I expected them to go heavy bourbon right into it after a couple years of rye whiskey.
Yeah, you would think that. I traditionally think of the Parker's Heritage as Heritage Heaven Hill, which is to me bourbon, but it shows their flexibility that they've really not shown much of a hand for yet. Mm-hmm. That they're sitting on some aged stocks of malt whiskey. Now, I don't believe that they have much single malt, so this is probably a blend of rye and a little bit of a corn, probably.
Probably.
So they, kind of invert the bourbon recipe with 51% malt. And so it'll be interesting to see what Heaven Hill does, especially now that they're going to get some more production online, if they're going to be ramping up and embracing the single malt style or just malt whiskey in general.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting thing to see how heritage brands continue to play in that, sphere, per se. How does that, kind of continue to show up? So speaking of heritage brands, let's come back to Louisville, Kentucky on this one. So right downtown, there's two brands that have released, a lot of good things. Old Forester, released their birthday bourbon. I unfortunately was not able to win the lottery. Did you even enter it, or did you just finally accept defeat?
I entered. I did not win. Yeah, I did not win.
It's like, I know they're nice with their overall like email and things, but sometimes that email feels like a swift kick in the shin versus like actually feeling like I lost. I'd rather just tell them have a big dunce cap and just say loser.
Womp womp. That's what they should do.
Exactly.
A little audio file.
Like one of those automated cards you just open up and it says womp womp. Yeah, not a winner here, but I think, everyone always everyone is always in search of birthday bourbon. It's a classic release that happens every year. Angel's Envy dropped something that I didn't expect to see. The Triple Oak finished, and Owen continues to find new ways to show the flavor of their bourbon without, a finished wine cask, without port or tawny port or rum cask as they've done in the past. So that's really interesting. The Chinkapin and the Hungarian and the French oak.
Yeah, I've always thought of Angel's Envy as the finishing cask. This might sound bad, but the flavoring finishing cask versus oak finishing, where we talk double oaked or toasted oak or French oak. So I think it's very interesting that they've come out with a triple oak. I was excited to see it. Obviously it's a line extension for their signature lineup, which means it'll hopefully be more readily available. And I think it'd be worth
it's priced accordingly too for that, which is interesting. I've seen Angel's Envy's prices come down considerably over the last several months, and I guess that's probably due to increased production and their expansion of their distillery. But speaking of toasted barrels, one of your favorite pours for Kentucky Bourbon Festival, right down on 8th Street, was
Michter's Toasted Barrel Bourbon, which they said is the 10th anniversary of Toasted Barrel Bourbon, which to think that they've been doing that for 10 years,
Phew.
it's like the OGs.
It seems like it. I mean, I feel like that was the first person I ever heard of doing toasted barrels. Now I'm sure there was some experimental things happening along the way, but that one really kind of stuck out in my head as being the one that really started the fire for that secondary finish type of deal.
Yeah, and some people might say like it's not finished.
Yeah,
but whatever, it is. Secondary barrel aging, finishing, right?
Yeah. Yes. Secondary barrel. We have scoured the TTB. We have asked people. It is a finishing cask. If you have to put what is done in it to it, it changes the flavor and aromas of said blend of whiskey or bourbon.
So again, the problem with that is just finding it.
Oh, I know.
So
that's the hard part about Michter's in general is like they release a lot of good bourbon and rye whiskey and just whiskey in general, and it's impossible to find in Kentucky, but outside of their core lineup. The core lineup's good, but like sometimes you want the great. You don't want to stand for good. So that one's tough. Speaking of a brand that is connected to Louisville, Kentucky, but resides in Lynchburg, Tennessee. They brought back a big brand with something they did with the Coy Hill. I think this is a little bit older than the last one, a little bit less proof. Coy Hill Warehouse 8, Barrel House 8, as they say. 134.7 was the sample I got. What did you get from a sample perspective?
Yeah, I think I got the same one. 134. It's a big boy whiskey, Coy Hill.
It is, but for 134.7, I thought it was rather enjoyable. I thought there was a ton of flavor to it. And a couple drops of water really, really made that thing blow up from a whole flavor profile perspective.
Yeah, I think it just helps some of those oils separate and really like wakes it up for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting as you start to go outside the state, how people bring nuances to this seasonality of SO&D, right? So you have Coy Hill, which is, kind of that heritage release that they do out of Jack Daniel's. Last year was the special barrel rye whiskey, the twice barreled rye, which was phenomenal. And so now, like speaking around the states of Kentucky, there's been a lot of cool releases. One that I've yet to get to try because you have hoarded the sample of it comes from Colorado.
We just haven't hung out enough, I guess. Yeah. Kentucky Bourbon Festival wasn't enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Boulder's new cast strength bourbon. I mean, every year it's incredible. And this year it's almost 7.5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just like they keep getting older, they keep getting wiser, and the bourbon just keeps getting better.
Well, and it's funny because you talk to Ryan or you talk to Alistair and they want to be known as a single malt distillery, right? They want to be known as an American single malt distillery. But I'm like, guys, like y'all put out great bourbon. Y'all need to be laying down bourbon more frequently. And it'd be really interesting to see what kind of rye they could do with that pot still, because that pot still is wild. Like it puts out a lot of good flavor overall. So maybe that's on the horizon. He didn't mention that when I was out there a couple months ago, but you don't know what they do in their free time.
You didn't get the scoop.
No, I didn't get the scoop. But they also will be releasing very soon their new trail edition, right? So they had the 10 Essentials last year. I know their next trail edition's coming up soon. So pay attention to what's happening out in Boulder. I'll go a little bit north because this is another whiskey I've not gotten to for you to try. Is National Parks No. 4 from Wyoming Whiskey. Last year was my favorite weeded bourbon that I had a lot of. WLW is hard to beat, right? Like it was really good. Shout out to the Sazerac team for letting us try it last year. But man, national parks aged 5 years, like what they're able to create at Wyoming at younger ages is pretty damn impressive in my book.
I was kind of surprised it was only 5 years.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, not that there's anything wrong with a 5-year-old weeded bourbon from Wyoming, but it's like, I think they've got a little bit older stock, but maybe it's just how much volume they're trying to put out. And it's a fundraiser.
I think it's the volume. I think it's a volume play, to be honest. And it's priced more affordably. I think these used to be more of kind of their halo, and then they've put a halo above that. So they put out a new series on top of this, and this one's called Old Faithful, and it's like their old stock whiskey. It carries like a $200-$300 price tag, and then you have the national parks below that. So I think it's kind of becoming that like stable, try to be a shelfer type deal at $79. But it's an extremely good wheated bourbon. And I'm going to come back to Kentucky just real quick on a wheated bourbon note. Origins from Bardstown wheated bourbon.
Yeah.
Is very good.
Yeah, so they extended their lineup. They had the 3 core offerings, and we all were waiting. Where's the wheated bourbon? But, it's a Steve Nally product, and he's always said it takes a little bit longer.
Yep.
So
6 years, baby.
Right on cue.
Yep. So, tie those two together. You got to make it look pretty, right? And speaking of a distillery that I was surprised to see at Kentucky Bourbon Festival, we're going to go to Lawrenceburg, Indiana, one of our favorite releases on a yearly basis. You got to try it, I believe, at the festival. I tried it last night on a fresh palate. Remus Repeal Reserve 8 VIII. Coming in at 101 proof, but it does have a blend. The blend on this is really incredible. 17% or 9% is 17-year-old bourbon, and then the rest of the components, 24%, 21% rye, is 10 years old, and 67% 10-year-old, 36% rye bourbon. A really good blend, really well balanced. And for someone like yourself, I think you'll appreciate this on a fresh palate even more because it's not that big rye bomb like you think it might be. It's really kind of the way I described it is a hot toddy in a glass.
Oh.
It's got a little bit of that citrus lemon, but a lot of that honey, vanilla action going on. Really, really enjoyable whiskey.
Good for the fall time. I mean, seems like sickness is flying around here lately.
Oh my gosh. Seems like everybody.
Keep that one nearby.
For sure. And then their sister distillery, I guess, our producer, Penelope drops Valencia. That was one of our first pours of Saturday, was going in and was that Saturday or Friday? I can't remember. It feels like all the days ran together at Kentucky Bourbon Festival.
Still decompressing, yeah.
Yeah, but that was one of our first pours, and man, it did not disappoint on Friday. Trying Valencia, I thought that the Vino de Naraha, I think, has a special place in our heart because we did a barrel pick with a different distillery, but that one I think is a lot of people will appreciate that whiskey.
Yeah, I think it's well done, right? Like VDN cask is kind of a delicate finish. Like you don't get a lot of it, but you sense something's there.
Yeah, for sure.
That kind of elevated some of the Penelopes I've had, which most of them have been incredible regardless. But
yeah, no, I think Danny and Michael definitely know what they're doing. They've kind of really caught their footing when it comes to blending. And, now they have the keys to the candy store at Willy Wonka's Whiskey Factory in Lawrenceburg. But now we're going to go south, and you've tried a couple good whiskeys out of this giant state called Texas. You've had the Milam and Green Unabridged, Volume 3.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
How was that, by the way?
Excellent. I mean, that's their cast strength lineup, which unabridged, it's a literary reference, but it's basically just uncut, unfiltered. And I think it's at 117 proof. It's always just solid. So it's a blend of the Kentucky, it's a blend of the Texas. Heather Green just does a good job blending whiskey. Like, never any sharp edges.
Yeah.
It doesn't blow your palate out. Like, it's just easy to drink. No exceptions on this one. Volume 3 was very good. I had it a couple times now. So at KBF and then at home. So can't complain.
Can't complain. And then there's the real big boy whiskey. We yeehaw on this one.
Yeah. Every year, Garrison's Brother releases their cowboy bourbon, which they like their high proof whiskey. and I don't think it's very hard to get there.
No, not out of Texas.
So this year, I think it's 140 plus proof yet again, hazmat. It always releases in September. And we're working on getting them on the podcast as well. We've had a few people ask about like Texas whiskeys and things like that, but I figured Garrison Brothers would be a good introduction to some people for, they're the original, what they claim is the original bourbon distillery in Texas. So, and that's all they do. They only do bourbon.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Texas is very interesting. Excited to continue to dive into Texas. I'm excited to go to Texas for my birthday.
Watch some foosball.
Watch some football. It's going to be sad. I think Texas is going to be pretty stout by that time of year. And Kentucky hasn't scored a touchdown in 8 quarters of football as we speak. So hopefully it gets better against Ohio this weekend. And gotta get healthy because Ole Miss is right around the corner too. Yikes.
Yeah. Tighten those belts.
Yeah, exactly. No rest for the weary in the ACC or in the SEC. Okay, so we've talked about brands as a whole, and we've had some non-producing distillers in there, obviously. But I think one of the things that I've taken away from this September timeframe is the celebrity aspect of this. Big names, big brands, that have backed them coming into this space. We'll start with one that you worked really closely with on the beginning press release in country music. Tell us a little bit about what's happening with that brand and who it is.
So Dierks Bentley is diving into the whiskey game and introduced Row 94 whiskey, which I don't know why you wouldn't call it Row 94 bourbon, because that's what it is. It's a Kentucky straight bourbon.
Straight from Owensboro, baby.
So again, this is what I like. If you're going to do something, say what it is, right? So it's a Kentucky straight bourbon. They proudly say it's made at DSP KY10 Green River. So we know where it's coming from. We know it's got some great whiskey coming from there. I think it's a 4-year. Don't quote me. But he wanted to release a whiskey. And I think that, more power to these celebrities that want to put in the effort to work on a whiskey, release a whiskey, even if it's working with, a master blender or, a team or somebody in addition to them. We all know that they're not whiskey makers by trade, but they need the assistance. They can't just say, well, this tastes good to me. We'll just put that in a barrel and be done. So I think it's cool. It's cool branding, cool marketing. I'm not sure how it'll be perceived in Tennessee, being that it's a Kentucky bourbon, but I think Dierks Bentley's a lot bigger than Tennessee. So,
yeah, I think he'll be okay. And the fact that he's all in on it, like he's a brand person. Every video, every commercial, everything I've seen about Row 94 has been Dierks Bentley in the middle of it. This other celebrity brands that you hear about, right? You don't necessarily see the front man for it. And so kudos to him, working on getting Dierks on the podcast. Super pumped about it. I like his music and like that. Now there's even a bigger star that has gotten into this game. She's got a whole following of people. They call them the Beehive. So we're talking about Beyonce. We've not had this whiskey yet. Sir Davis. It is a rye whiskey. It is a finished rye whiskey. Reserving judgment to taste it ourselves. It is a cool looking bottle, I will say that, with a horse on it. So really interested about that, as how does that pull in a new demographic of people, right? Because I feel like tequila has been the thing for a lot of celebrities at that status level. Let's get a celebrity tequila.
Yeah.
And just pick a celebrity that has a tequila at that level of person. Because like she's the elite of the elite. So to have her come into whiskey, I think is really cool. And interested to see how that kind of plays out and what type of casual whiskey fan that brings. Yeah,
no, I don't think it's exorbitantly expensive like some celebrity tequilas have been. It seems like it's priced right. Obviously, time will tell with how it's perceived in the market, but she's going to get her fan base to purchase this, or at least
Even
try
if
it
it's a
at
collector's
a bar.
item.
Yeah, or put it on their bar and as a collector. But cool bottle. I mean,
Yeah.
I honestly, it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, like if the whiskey tastes good, great, even better. But it's like I think it's going to bring new eyes to whiskey, which who's gonna fault that?
Nobody. And no whiskey producer should fault if one of the biggest celebrities in the world gets a chance to bring a brand to life. And then I know a show that you've enjoyed and talked about many times on the show, Yellowstone's actor. I think the actor in that show his name's Rip on the show, I believe. My wife's a fan of Yellowstone. I am not. He's put out a whiskey, and it really cool looking bottle and brand as well. You know a lot more about this one than I do. What's Rip's character? I don't know his real name. What's he up to?
Yeah, so it's Cole Hauser.
There we go.
And he's been an actor for a really long time. I actually found this out the other day. He was one of the bad guys in, I believe it was Fast and Furious 2. And if you go back and look it up, you won't recognize him compared to what he looks like in Yellowstone. You know, the big burly dude, cowboy hat and all that. So that's your homework for the day. You got to go look that up. But Cole Hauser, Rip, in the show, which hopefully will come back and maybe have a few more episodes to kind of wrap some storylines up, but launched his bourbon. It was late last year, but it was very, very limited. And I believe it was just in Montana, but they've pushed out a nationwide release within the past month. So it's called Lazy K Bar Bourbon, and it's kind of like Western themed. It's got, I'll tell it's one of the best looking bottles that I've seen this year. So it's kind of a squared off bottle, and it's got leather wrapped, and I believe it's real leather because when I opened the box to take it out, I was like, wow, that smells really good. It smells like a leather shop. It's got a branding on it on the front, Lazy K Bar. I guess it's terminology for cattle ranchers and things, but it's a Kentucky straight bourbon, 8 years, and it was aged partially in Montana. So yeah, that's another one. It's like, it seems like he's very well invested in the brand and the branding, the marketing, and now they're having a big like nationwide push. So
no, it's pretty cool. And this is just the tip of the spear, because I've probably got another 10, 15 things we could probably talk about. And your head would continue to spin as Scott and I's head continues to spin. One of the most fun brands, I will just leave you with this, was the Quadroforce. So Filmland Spirits dropped another drop. It's a 4-state blend. It's super interesting. The video for it's awesome. It's on YouTube. I missed those guys this year at Kentucky Bourbon Festival, but that one was pretty cool. I just love what those guys do. They could put out crappy whiskey, but they don't. But those videos just make me chuckle, and they're so much fun to watch and engage with as you sip the whiskey itself.
Yeah, that one's interesting. It's a 4-grain, 4-state bourbon blend at cast strength.
Yeah,
should be interesting.
Should be interesting. You'll have to wait for the review. It's coming soon. I got a fresh palate. We'll continue to have the reviews for the rest of the month on the Bourbon Lens website. You know, Kentucky Bourbon Festival really slowed the roll on that one, but it's all good. Reviews come and go.
It was hard to put pen to paper.
It's life gets in the way sometimes, but there's a whole new month coming up. October's going to be here before we know it. We're going to have the Van Winkle collection. We're going to have the antique collection. We're going to have who the hell else knows what else is coming.
Yeah, make some predictions now. Yeah, good luck.
Yeah. And, you know, we're hoping one release that happened this month really steps it up for both of our palates. We're hoping Maker's Mark Cellar Age meets us where we are this year. Not had a chance to try it, but that is one release here in September that I'm scratching my head, hoping, praying that it is a lot better here in 2024 than it was in 23 for us.
Yeah, it's a little bit older. I spent more time in that hallowed cellar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
another heritage brand that's like, hey, we can do old whiskey too.
I know, man. Again, we could go on and on and on, but I think at this we've given everybody a good list. We've put a bow on Bourbon Heritage Month. We're excited for October. There's a ton of stuff coming up. Make sure you're locked into the Bourbon Lens. We really appreciate you following along and hanging out with us. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Bourbon Lens. Make sure you're connected with Scott and I via social media on Instagram, X, and Facebook. We'd love to connect. And if you're more the professional type, follow us over on LinkedIn. If you want to know more about Bourbon Lens, make sure you're subscribed to our weekly newsletter, The Weekly Pour. For exclusive content and more, check out Patreon. Follow us there at Bourbon Lens. And last but not least, on your favorite podcast listening app, make sure you're subscribed because every Monday, Scott and I release a podcast, and we would love to have you here listening to the newest features and the newest whiskey news. And until next time, cheers.